All right, so let's get things started. Thank you so much for spending your lunchtime with us as our last lunch talk this semester. My name is Mian Fei, and I am a graduate research associate at the QualLab. We are a research center focusing on advancing qualitative inquiry towards innovation, equity, diversity, and justice at The Ohio State University's College of Education and Human Ecology. Let me actually start sharing my screen. So joining us today is Dr. Kaleb Briscoe from Mississippi State University. She will soon give us a lunch talk on centering Black women in research, a Black feminist autoethnography journey. So before we start, I will wish to acknowledge that the land of The Ohio State University is located on the traditional homeland of the Shawnee, Miami, Lenape, and Wyandotte nations and other indigenous nations who have strong ties to this land. So today's agenda is very straightforward. We will first have some words of welcome and an introduction to the QualLab from our director, Dr. Penny A. Briscoe. I will then say a few housekeeping rules for the lunch talk. Before Dr. Briscoe gives her presentation, we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so you have opportunity to raise any questions. And I will close today's lunch talk by telling you how you can get involved in the QualLab. So without further ado, Dr. Briscoe, please take it away by welcoming all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. We really appreciate it. We've put together a wonderful program throughout the year in order to make sure that we're talking about issues of qualitative, not just your topics, but how to actually take up research methodologies, methods, philosophies, theories that actually connect with and what you purport in terms of your topics. We should actually be doing methodologies that work toward innovation, equity, diversity, and justice. And so our work with the QualLab is about just that. We have some things that are public, like our dashboard of resources and events like this, and then other things that are for just the College of Education, which are consultations. I'll talk about that in a second. We also have Advanced Methods Institute, and I'm pleased to announce that registration is opening today. And so you'll hear a little bit about that at the end. It's a collection of fantastic scholars who will be really talking about the Institute, and a keynote and award given to Gloria Latson-Billings. And the endnote will be with Tara Yoso. So I'm excited about that as well. But for the QualLab, we do consultations for EHE, and this is for faculty, research teams, grad students, anything except for coursework, where it's one-on-one and we're open. Just log on and sign up. When we had more capacity in the college, we were able to actually do it externally too for a small fee, but that's on hold since we have a hiring freeze like many institutions. I'm going to pass it back over for introductions of our stellar speaker, but I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the work of the presenter today, Dr. Briscoe. Her work is intentional. It pushes the edge of scholarship, and I'm just thrilled that we get a chance to engage with her today. So thank you again for being here, and I'll pass it back to Mian.
Great, thank you, Penny. So just a few housekeeping rules before we start. So please turn off your microphone during the presentation. But please feel free to share any questions or comments using the chat space. Dr. Briscoe will address your questions during the Q&A session at the end, or you can turn on your microphone and raise a question directly towards her. I want to draw your attention that this session is being recorded, and you will be able to access the recording on our YouTube channel after the session. Closed captioning is provided during the session, so you can enable the function at the bottom right corner of your video box. So now let's welcome our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Kaleb Briscoe. Before she starts, I will have the honor and pleasure to introduce her. So Dr. Kaleb Briscoe is assistant professor in the Department of Educational Leadership at Mississippi State University. She received her PhD in educational studies with a concentration in educational leadership and higher education from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Dr. Briscoe's research problematized oppressed and marginalized populations within higher education through critical theoretical frameworks and qualitative methodological approaches. Through her scholarship on campus, racial climate, she seeks to disrupt whiteness and white supremacy on predominantly white campuses. Her research shapes administrators, especially university presidents, responses to race and racism by challenging their use of anti-Blackness and non-performative rhetoric. Dr. Briscoe is a recent Sponsor Foundation grant recipient for a project entitled Resistant or Racism, unpacking critical race theory bends in a social political era of anti-racism, with co-principal investigator Dr. Veronica John Baldwin. Dr. Briscoe's work has been published in the Journal of College Student Development, Journal of Diversity in Higher Education Research and Development, Journal of International Students, and Journal of Student Affairs Research and Practice. Again, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours, Dr. Briscoe.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're situated. Thank you, Mim, for the kind introduction. I really appreciate all of your efforts. I remember when I was a grad student, so just thank you for all of your work. Thank you, Dr. Briscoe, for the kind invitation. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Dr. Briscoe through my involvement through ACPA as an emerging scholar, and I just appreciate you welcoming me into this space to talk a little bit about the work that I do, and particularly Black feminist autoethnography more broadly. So we're going to get started. So I am thrilled to be here and to talk with you all for a little bit about this notion of centering Black women in research, a Black feminist autoethnography journey. And I want to really give props to one of my dear friends, Dr. Jesse Ford, for designing this presentation. I am not good with PowerPoints, so I just appreciate his craftsmanship. And if anyone is ever in need of someone, that is who you should call. So I want to recognize the land in which that I inhabit at Mississippi State University, which is sitting and resides on the ancestral homeland of the Choctaw Nation. I really want to pay respect and honor to those who are both living and deceased, and really represent the historical legacy in which this land occupies in the territory that I sit on. So to give an overview of what we're going to talk about, and I'm excited to welcome your questions at the end, both about the work and more broadly about how you could apply Black feminist autoethnography. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about me. It's important to both, when engaging in this methodological approach, to situate and reflect on who you are and your proximity and reflexivity, and how I really come to do this work. I'll talk a little bit about a collaborative paper and project that I've been working alongside some brilliant sister scholars with, and then move to talking a little bit about what Black feminist thought is and how I situate that in larger conversations of Black feminist autoethnography. I'll talk about some of the unique considerations and challenges when doing this work, and then really have you all think about how can you both help write Black women into existence. So to start things off, and I think I'm going to move y'all to the bottom. To start things off, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I come from a legacy of brilliant Black people and Black women in particular. Both of my parents were first-generation college students. Both went to HBCUs in a setting and period when they were only allowed to go to HBCUs. Everyone in my immediate family are a part of Divine Nine organizations. I am a proud auntie, or TT as I call it, of two gorgeous, handsome young boys, Christian, who was actually born while I was at ACPA, and Curtis, who we affectionately call Trey. I have a very loving fiance who is not in higher ed, which is perfect for me, but is just a huge advocate of the works that I do. And I often tell individuals that when you think of me and look at me, you must recognize my mantra, which is God, family, higher ed. And it is because of God that I am able to do the work that I do and really advocate for Black women more broadly. So how I come to this work, I must both situate and be grateful and show appreciation to my mother, who is just a phenomenal person. And when I think of who she is and how she guided me from childhood experiences, being a Black girl to now being a Black woman, it's important to note that I was born and raised in Woodstock, Georgia, which in the time was very white and rural. I was one of the only Black children within the school district. My mother was one of the only Black faculty member, and my father was one of the only Black administrators. And I talk about that because when I thought about my experiences within classroom spaces, I never saw myself exist. But my mom really poured into me this notion of, you may not read Maya Angelou, Bell Hooks, or Audre Lorde in the classroom, but you'll learn that at home. And so those experiences were critical to how I both made sense of who I was as a Black girl and now as a Black woman. And particularly, I think of some of the unique challenges that she endured when she was a Black graduate student, having left an HBCU environment, getting accepted into a large, predominantly white institution, again, first generation college student, and being essentially driven off that campus due to issues of racism, sexism, and discrimination, due to interactions negatively with white faculty members. And while her experiences has been many years ago, which I won't name her age, but those experiences were almost mirrored when I was a Black graduate student. And so it really makes me think about and situate how I come to this work, recognizing that for decades we've been having these conversations, but nothing has been done. So I want to take the time to both honor and talk about a collaborative project that I've been working alongside brilliant Black women, Dr. Tiffany Steele, which is an alum of Ohio State, and Dr. Candace Hall. And so I'm going to spend a little time talking about this project, and then particularly the parts around the Black Feminist Autoethnography, which was my unique contribution methodologically to the project. And so I want to talk with you all about what it means and what happens for Black women doctoral students throughout their experiences in higher education, particularly higher education programs. And so we know this is not a new phenomenon of the troubled experiences of Black women. We know that this has been interrogated, and particularly how Black women doctoral students have been questioned, right, about their credibility, and whether or not they can, thrive or survive rather in these programs. They experience both hostile racial environments that are often rooted in racism and sexism. They are one of the few, if not only, within their doctoral programs and spaces. And to the point of the example of my mom, often asked to leave those programs and environments, or even leave as a result of these experiences. And so when we think particularly about Black women they endure gender racial microaggressions, which when we think about what that looks like, it is really subtle and everyday verbal, behavioral, and environmental expressions of oppression based on intersections of race and gender. And while this definition labels this as subtle and everyday verbal, this has, and through this work I'll talk about, lasting impactful harm on Black women, right? And so when we think about gendered racial microaggressions, what I mean as an example is these stereotypes that Black women are angry, right? Or being ignored in academic spaces, or even this notion of being labeled as too aggressive or too loud. So for this work, we centered and described two research questions. How have Black women doctoral students survived higher education programs and challenge dominant norms within academia? What structural barriers at PWIs hinder Black women doctoral students in higher education programs from thriving? So it's important to both situate this larger context and even honor an array of Black women who have been doing this work for decades, primarily talking about how Black women doctoral experiences are chilly, talking about the ways, thinking of Freeze Britt and Bridget Turner Kelly's work about how Black women need individuals to help them lift and climb, thinking about how these dynamics, particularly between white peers and faculty members, particularly harm Black women within these environments. And so we talk about what this looks like and how, although this is not new, this is continuously occurring. And then the context of our current social political climate where Black women are being targeted in the media and sports makes this even more relevant to the experiences that are happening on college campuses today. And so we think about these gendered racial microaggressions and again, how they are sometimes framed subtle, but they manifest in these environments and they cause physical and mental harm to Black women. And so it's important to denote that we cannot decouple the gendered racial experiences and that we need to situate how these are systemic issues, therefore they should be addressed from an institutional mechanism. And then lastly, we think of this notion of surviving to thriving and really think of this new conceptual framing of how we push programs, people, actors to really dismantle this notion that Black women can only survive, right? And I think of my good friend Antar, who talks about Black joy under the guise of higher education, and even Bettina Love's work and notion around this piece of surviving to thriving. And it's this notion of to thrive, we must curate space and place, as Bettina Love names. And so it's important to note that how are we creating space and place for Black women to thrive within these environments? Are we even doing that? So when we situate these conversations, we have to think and or utilize frameworks that have been talking about these very pieces for decades. And so particularly it's important to denote, if we're looking at this through a Black feminist lens, thinking about Colin's work, the unique place that Black women are situated in and their unique experiences, particularly collectively and individually. And so it's important to think about how often Black women and their ways of knowing is questioned and challenged within these environments. How they often have to push back on notions and problematic rhetoric about who they are within these systems and places. How systems aren't designed to even allow Black women to thrive, to survive, let alone thrive. And when we think of what this looks like, it really is this notion of how are we defining and just remaining conscious about what it means for Black women to have these intersectional experiences that essentially dismantle who they are as individuals. So I want to take some time to both talk about what Black feminist autoethnography is, how we use it for this study, and how it can be used more broadly. And so Black feminist autoethnography really makes visible within both the research process the experiences of Black women. And so it situates them as both a way of knowing, but also a methodological tool of advancing conversations about Black women issues. And so more broadly, when you think of using Black feminist autoethnography, also known as BFA, it's important to understand that the situation of how Black women write themselves in existence are nuanced and can be done in many ways. And so when we think about this from a critical methodological stance, it's important to understand that the ways that this can be constructed can be different, meaning Black women can write themselves into existence using poems, using mixtapes, journaling, and or reflecting on their experiences, engaging in collective conversations, both about their individual experiences and their collective ways of knowing. And so BFA really narrates and serves as a narrative for how Black women can highlight their unique struggles without erasing themselves and decoupling their very existence. It's also used as a tool, as Hooks talks about talking back. So pushing back on those dominant ideologies of what Black women should be and how they should exist within different systems of oppression. So what we did for this study, again, thinking through both Black feminist lens and using Black feminist autoethnography, was we really resisted the images and self-definitions that were given by white peers and white faculty about who we were and who we should be within systems. We really talked about what it meant to be a Black woman, right? And how we are labeled within educational systems. And we really thought about this surviving to thriving notion and how Black women should deserve joy within these spaces, despite the gendered and racial experiences that take place. And so over the course of 2020-2021 academic year, we first started to collectively discuss our experiences and the unique aspects of our programs and in our backgrounds. We developed a series of questions where we engaged in reflexivity and journaling to really understand, well, what were our individual experiences? From those memos, we saw that there was this notion that we did have some individual aspects that stood out, but also collectively there were these narratives of harm and burden that took place as a result of these programs. We did then engaged in 2 90-minute focus groups to further talk about our overall experiences, and we centered BFT throughout those conversations. And so we talked a lot about how were we self-defined through these programs? How did we resist and push back on the ways that we were asked to show up in space and place? How do we humanize our experiences for other Black women coming along the way? And so we analyzed this data in many ways, first starting with rereading and really centering and honoring those who have talked about the unique experiences of Black women. And so thinking about pivotal work around Patton and Krista Porter and Shayla Haynes and so many other women within higher education who talk about issues around Black women, particularly around the doctoral experience. And so we first started with looking at, well, what has been those residual conversations, and then thinking also about engaging in analyzing the journal data. So what we did as far as the memoing and journaling from an individual and collective stance. And then we moved to analyze the focus group data, where we color coded using BFT multiple rounds in more of an open coding manner, so we could really understand what was happening and what were some of these narratives that were prevalent to our individual and collective experiences. So I want to take a second to honor my good sister scholars and even talk about how we describe ourselves within the context of our paper and our study. So one of the things that we recognized quickly is that to write ourselves into existence meant to also see more people that look like us. And one of the commonalities was that all of our programs did not have Black women within the area. one of the three who eventually got a couple of Black women that came into their program towards the end of their experience. And so sometimes we were looking for, and I'll talk about this more deeply in the findings, looking for Black women to guide us and show us and teach us. But we also look to media, right? To understand what are powerful Black women who do this work in other ways, who have had unique challenges. And so that birthed our pseudonyms, giving honor to Viola Davis, Kerry Washington, and Issa Rae, and the dopeness that they produced through shows like How to Get Away with Murder, Scandal, and Insecure, all of which shows that really helped us during our time as doctoral students to really de-stress and decouple some of the hardships that we were experiencing. So I want to take the time to talk a little bit about some of our major findings. And so we first thought about this notion of the burden of managing it all. And so there's been lots of conversations within literature about this notion of having to juggle. And while this is talked about more broadly within graduate students of color experiences, it's heavily discussed in the context of Black women who are often asked to do more within these spaces than their peers. And so it was this burden of managing both the professional and personal aspects that took a psychological and physical toll on us throughout our experience. And so I highlight a quote from Viola. Being a Black woman doctoral student meant you had to have superpowers. Everyone expected you to exceed all expectations. The department supervisors and advisors expected more from me as a Black woman. I noticed how my white peers would do the minimal on research teams and projects, but I was expected to do it all and do it all well. Researchers would push me in ways to make me better, but to remind me that you have to work to be here. My presence meant work. I was not given opportunities, I had to earn them. If I wanted a career in academia, I had to work twice as hard to get opportunities, to get noticed by my white faculty members. This meant I did not get to rest physically or rest on my laurels. Whiteness was not an option for me because my Black skin meant nothing to me, and I was not given passes for just showing up. Nothing was given to me, so I had to do it all to even get half of what was given to my white peers. I did not think of this as juggling. I thought of it as surviving. And so one of the things in the conversations of the interview that came out that honestly didn't make the paper, and as I sit here and rethink about just hearing the conversation, Viola talked about how she became visibly ill from the ways that her white peers and white faculty members were treating her, visibly in the sense that she began to have welts and marks around her chest, developed anxiety, and had never had anxiety before then. And particularly, she talked about her proximity to her advisor, who was a white woman, and how immediately after she transitioned from that advisor, her body began to heal and her mind began to heal. So it was very telling of this environment and the ways that she was being asked to do all these things was physically harming her. So the next thing that came out was this notion of navigating trauma and burnout, right? And so thinking about how these gendered racial microaggressions and from mistreatment, and thinking about how being labeled as angry or being labeled as too dominant was really salient to the experiences. And so hearing this rhetoric over and over again, and hearing again this notion of you're not good enough from white faculty and white peers really made us question, right? Could we be in these spaces? And really led to this notion of fatigue. And so Issa said, my advisor, white woman, suggested that I give something up. But the reality as a Black woman, there was nothing that was non-negotiable for me. I was not a part of a full-time funded program, so I had to work full-time. I had to think about more than just me, but my family. There were times when I was burnt out for being everything to everyone. The last thing I wanted to do was force myself to push through and write. So instead of putting that kind of pressure on myself, I had to come to terms with the fact my journey looked different from my peers. When I was not writing, I felt guilty about not doing that. When I was writing, I felt guilty about time away from my family. I thought I had to push through burnout, even when it was all too much, because that's all I know. And so when we think about the stereotypes of Black women being categorized as memorying or nurturing or having to show up for other people, what we need to also note is how this leads and causes burnout, right? And so the other piece that is very prevalent is this notion of, well, how are advisors, essentially saying that you should give something up, but still pushing you to do all the things. And then finally, we think about, this notion of thriving, right? And so despite all these structural barriers that existed and hindered us from moving to this notion of thriving, what would this look like as a way of knowing, centering Black feminist thought of how Black women doctoral students can thrive? And so us really taking what happened to us and creating kind of this conceptual framing of how we can move through this process. So Carrie talked about, I did not have any Black faculty. Black faculty did not come to our program. I was about to leave. I couldn't even really have class with them and stuff like that. But when Black faculty got there, they were like, oh, who are the Black students? Swoop. They took care of us, connecting with Black women who were in the academy. And then if you found the right ones willing to give you the game, hey, this is what you need to do. Do not do too much, focus on your work, try to figure out ways to infuse your work into your core self. I could thrive because it was another Black woman telling me this. This is how it should be. This is how we should do it, because no one else could do that for me in my program. And so one of the unique pieces was this notion of, again, we've talked about this in literature for many years, this notion of how we should have Black faculty within programs. But I think our point and the point of these conversations is not just enough to have Black faculty, right? And one Black faculty, which is often the norm. What does it look like to have collective Black voices, particularly Black women, guiding other Black women and essentially showing them the game of higher education? And how can we curate spaces that provide this type of knowledge for Black women that help them move to thriving? So we talk about some of the implications of our work. Again, this notion of curating space, thinking about Love's notion of this moving towards thriving from surviving. And what does it look like to curate space that we acknowledge the voices and knowledge and expertise of Black women? And so how are we infusing Black women into curriculums and programs, and not just asking them to be in programs, so recruiting them to be within these spaces, but how are we helping them show up and show out within these spaces? We next name this notion of, again, how can we have more Black women supporting Black women doctoral students? So individuals who have gone through this, especially in white environments, and have moved again from this notion from surviving to thriving, and what that looks like to actually usher others along the way. And then lastly, we really have to name and offer this critique of being mindful, particularly white faculty members, of explicit messages that they project on Black women. So recognizing how white faculty members should be mindful of saying things like Black women don't speak well or Black women don't write well, and noting how it's not happening to their white peers or other students of color. It's specifically being named to Black women. Lastly, as we sit with this work, we think of different possibility models that will shift the narratives and the norms of surviving in higher education. We think about this reiteration of joy and what joy could look like for Black women to thrive within these environments. And we really urge researchers to understand the pervasiveness of whiteness and how it is really centered within the experiences of Black women doctoral students and how we can disrupt that. So I want to take some time to talk about some of the considerations and challenges of doing this work. And so what I often see and still it's fascinating is this notion of what we consider research, right? And how autoethnography in certain fields, especially in social science, has been labeled as me-search and can be devalued and criticized. I think of a student that I've had in the past who wanted to do particularly Black feminist autoethnography. And she was in social sciences. I won't say the discipline because some of this is Googleable, but she really wanted to do this phenomenal project. And she was told by all of her faculty members, which were white men, white women, some of even coming from minoritized framing, so thinking about section gendered aspects. But she was told that she could not do this work and she could not use Black feminist autoethnography. She was told that it would be frowned upon and that she would never be able to publish if she did this work. She was told she should not even look at autoethnography as a method. And I remember that conversation vividly because I was pretty much irate and began to, and her point of the conversation in one of my classes, which was discussing critical qualitative research, was what do I do now? I know this is great work. I know I should be using this approach, but what do I do now when I'm being told I can't? And one of her reasonings for taking my class was trying to figure out another approach. I said, are they telling you you can't because you can't? Or are they telling you you can't because they don't know what it is? And I walked her through how she should rationalize doing this work, what this work means more broadly, and how Black women are often erased and their experiences are not honored within methodological stances. And I even gave her some tools to push back on that. And I think about how there's this overarching lack of understanding of what Black feminist autoethnography is and what autoethnography work can do and how it should be valued in the field. And so those are constant challenges that come up of this notion of, well, what is it? Can you do and use autoethnography? Why should you use this in comparison to other approaches? And another challenge that I've even personally had is this notion of publishing the work, right? You may get the infamous reviewer number 2, who may question, one, the unique experiences of Black women and question this as a methodological tool. And I offer that if and when this happens, that you push back on them. When you do the work and you do it well, and we know these experiences are happening and continuously happen, they need to show up in methods too. And so that pushback could be talking with editors, that pushback could be, being mindful of where you're submitting work, and even reconsidering journals that may have a more equitable focus on the methods approach. But just know that this work does not come without challenges, resistance, and you even needing to have the strength as researchers to push back on dominant white ways of knowing. So I want to talk about what this means to support Black women through both this notion of thinking about Black feminist thought and thinking about what it would mean to do a Black feminist autoethnography study on what's been happening nationally around Black women under the guise of college athletics, looking at women basketball, right? So I am a stand of Stanley I love all things South Carolina. I love the way she approaches working with Black women. I love her unapologetic nature and just how she has guided the freshies as well as other Black women throughout women's basketball. And I don't think it's without remiss that 2 days before she nationally talked about how people were talking about her team, which are primarily Black women, that this same concept happened, right, for Angel, who is at LSU, right, and won the championship. And if we think about this through a Black feminist thought lens, particularly how they try to paint Black women, right, as hood and ghetto, right? I love how she is pushing back on this notion. And if we think about this black-white paradigm of Caitlin did the very same thing that she did, and she was then labeled as ghetto, right, or classless, or an idiot, and how white people had to double back and dial back that notion because she did the same thing, and the relabeling that occurred. It is just this thought of how are we supporting Black women within these spaces? And this very same notion is happening within classroom spaces, right? And so while this example talks about the massive of how Black women are viewed within college settings, without how they are viewed within sports, this is also a perfect example of how people harm Black women intentionally and how we have to push back on that and name that even in research approaches. And so I don't study Black athletics or individuals around sports, but there's amazing people both forthcoming, and I think of Joy Gales and Tamika Ferguson and others who are doing this work, who do a Black feminist autoethnography on this, because we need to name that we aren't thugs, we aren't monkeys, we aren't hood, we aren't ghetto. So I think it's important, as I come to close, how can we really write Black women into existence? And so whether you are a Black woman or not, you have a responsibility to help us name these issues. And so it's important that we all engage in reflexivity and practice on how we can write Black women into existence, how we should include them in both methods and approaches that demystify the way that we are painted within images. And we must continuously name that it is a problem that we only think that Black women should survive, but rather how can we make space for them to thrive within these environments? And so I want to know how you all are doing this or how you plan to do this. And then I want to end reading some of Griffin's Black Feminist Autoethnography work, which is the individual that we pull on for our scholarship. So an insert of the poem that she writes within her scholarship. I want to see the day when bodies in all colors and shapes and sizes and textures are regarded as precious rather than projects to be worked on up and over. I want to see the day when people hold themselves and each other accountable for thriving upon the pain of others. I want all women of all colors to come together to speak for ourselves, to bear witness to the damage we have done, and to brace one another for the struggles that remain. I am an angry Black woman. I am an angry Black woman who feels hopeful, sees promise, and desires progress. And I end with, I am an angry Black woman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Briscoe. Thanks for such a powerful presentation. And now I will open up the floor to all the audience for questions. So please just unmute yourself if you wish to raise a question. Thank you.
I had a question. I feel like one of the students in my gifted classes who raised their hand. I have a question. So people can get tired of that, but I do have one. I enjoyed your presentation, and I really appreciate what you had to say. when you first started, you brought up the trope, angry Black woman, and I was wondering where you were going to go with that. I was waiting to hear it, and at the end, you nailed it. I'm an angry Black woman, and I am not damn apologizing for it. And before you tell me I'm angry, I'm gonna tell you I'm angry, so we don't have to deal with that. So I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you, Dr. Ford. Can we just honor all the amazing Black women who are in the room? I don't personally know you, but I cite your work, and I see Dr. Venus Evans Winters, and I'm sure others in the room. Y'all have some dope Black women doing dope things at Ohio State. So let's just honor that. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
I've just gone through the chat. My mother is a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta.
Thank you. I was trying to figure out. I was
She-
looking at the picture and I said, I know which one is the Delta.
She is, and my mother is a charter member for Delta Sigma Theta too, and I am a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. And
Okay.
there's a story for another day of how that happened. But we are sisters at heart, and she is phenomenal.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Briscoe, for your presentation. So I see a few of my graduate students here, and I'm going to embarrass them. Hi, Hannah. I see you. We also have Venus Watson, not related, by the way. I can't see everybody, so I just always have to tell Hannah hi because she's always close by to the lab, the QualLab. So I do have a question because I just finished, now Hannah's going to be nervous. I just finished evaluating some students' work. And so I was just catching up on emails to see if they were going to be mad at me today before class, but they're all sending their love. But another student did disclose that they were in a research course and they were reading some critical qualitative research articles in that particular course, but the student said another article that I assigned was being laughed at in their other research course. And so how do you grapple with, especially for you, right, as a scholar who's, centering race and gender and critical qualitative methodologies in your work, what type of advice or suggestions would you give to our doc students, our advanced graduate students who are considering research that pushes back against the status quo? They're centering, gender and racial justice, but also qualitative research is getting a lot of pushback right now. It has been for almost 20, 30 years, but, is this real science, especially in the midst of a racial reckoning? What is considered real science? Which scholarship is being taken seriously? And how do we use this research in meaningful ways to shape policy and praxis? Because that's what the grad students want to know. Like, how do I eat and how do I stand on the side of righteousness?
No, and I appreciate that question so very much. So I think about this in two mechanisms, right? I think about what it means for Black women who want to do this work and how they do this, and also Black women who teach this work and have to endure these things. And both of these answers go hand in hand. If you know you want to do this work, you're going to have to endure. And my hope is that we won't always have to endure, right? That there will be enough of us that can push back on these dominant ways of knowing, that there's enough of us that are unapologetic about using these methodological tools. Going back to the example that I gave, that we learn how to talk the language that pushes back on them saying we can't do this, right? And knowing that we can. But that does not come without challenge and honestly, tax, right? That you will get the pushback. Now, I've taught critical qual, right? And I'm one of the few faculty who have taught this within social science area. And I know some of the both conversations that I've had and the candidness around who you should be citing and using, right? That has often come up. But I tell my students, doing good work stands on its own. So when you do good work, you can be ridiculed, you can be laughed at, right? But it doesn't mean you stop doing good work. So as grad students, and I think this is so important, if you know you want to do this work on the other side, if you know you aspire to do faculty or be a scholar practitioner that's doing both, do it now. Don't wait till you get your freedom papers, as I used to call my PhD. No, because if you start now and you do it now, and if you push back now, you'll be ready for those reviewers that are going to push back. It is brutal on the other side. You think you see a glimpse of this in classroom spaces or that specific faculty dismantle and name, it is worse on the other side. If I could show you the inserts of problematic reviews that I've had over the years, using critical methodological approaches and centering Black women, it would probably pierce your soul because it has mine. But yet still I rise. So if you want to still rise, you better do this work now and be unapologetic about it. And also don't be afraid to stick up for your faculty. Hey, this is dope work. I know why she's doing it. I understand it. You might not be liked then, but again, on the other side, you will one day be their colleagues. I hope that answers your question.
Go ahead.
So Brandy has her hands up. So if you would like to raise the question directly, Brandy, feel free to do so now. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Dr. Briscoe, thank you so much. Briscoe, thank you so much for your presentation. Warmed my heart. So I'm a PA scholar, and a lot of the conversation that you had, I've experienced myself within the context of our discipline. And one of the things that I was curious about was this idea or notion around writing ourselves into the research and being like a focal point of the study. But I think a lot about critical race theory. I think about Black feminist theory that sits at the praxis of like actually doing the work. So like, it's not just doing the research, but like, what's the work behind it? And I'm curious to like, for this to be I'm curious to know like, how do we actually get to the action piece, right? And so the biggest hurdle is for us to get our work published in some of these kind of predominant journals within and across our field. But like, what's the work after that, right? Like, how do we position ourselves to be in these institutions and not overly worked and burdened? Like the challenge that Black women face within the academy specifically is so daunting, and it's such an uphill battle. But like, what does it look like to be in a collective space, to have won the battle about research, and like, we're in these spaces, but what does that look like on the other side for the actual praxis of the engagement? So thank you for any thoughts you have.
Yeah, and I love that question. Thank you for that. You do both, right? You write about it, you talk about it, you be about it, right? And so the writing about it is you center in your work, right? The be about it is you show up for Black women on your campus and other campuses, right? You get in collective spaces, right? I honored some sister scholars that I write with for a reason, because how I do this is not alone, right? And so I think of Black women who have been amazing mentors to me, who have made space for me to do this. You also talk about this. Anytime you get a chance to insert like Black women's truth, you do it, right? Anytime you get an opportunity to uplift another Black woman doing dope work on your campus, you do it, right? And you may not even know that you do it, but you just do it, right? So if you get proximity to talk to a dean, then maybe you lift up your dope Black faculty members who are doing amazing work, right? Or if you're able to nominate other Black women scholars who are doing this, it has to be all of it. It can't just be publishing it, right? It has to be a collective community of folks all going after the same thing. And so just as hard as I present, publish, I mentor. I spend time with my Black women on campus. I spend time with Black women nationally, right? and that it's a lot, but we need each other. So we have to do both.
Is there time for another question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, quickly. So as you're talking, Dr. Briscoe, you reminded me of something really important in the context of qualitative research, and that is culture. And part of, without stereotyping, but talking about culture, part of the Black culture is called the oral tradition. And this is where speaking to us is more comfortable and very powerful. I'll work with children. I was going to do some Black English, y'all. Okay, let me do Dr. Ford. I will work with some Black children. And I just lost my train of thought trying to be silly. But anyway, I'll work with some children and Black girls in particular. We are blunt, we're direct, we tell it like it is. And you get that from me, and you definitely get it from Dr. Evans Winters as well. And I can see it in you, all right? Just waiting to come out, especially when you're answering these questions, I see it. But anyway, my point is, and then you have griots, oral, from our ancestors. So it is a natural transition, a natural fit, a natural combination that we will lean toward autoethnography and other types of qualitative research. And I don't think I'm overusing this word, but I got to say it again, and do it without apology. This is my work. This is my topic. This is the methods I want to use, etc. And if your advisor doesn't want to do it, you need to get another advisor, because this is about your work, not about your professor's work, although we're there to support you. So it's only natural that we will lean more toward qualitative research. And I love it because I get to speak and talk about who I am rather than be this, so to speak, neutral, superficial person whose voice is not, doesn't have an ability to come out. So thank you.
And I also want to name, as someone who switched advisors towards the end of my program, to your point, it was, I think of like the grace of God, the of him over my life. That was the best thing I ever did, to move from a problematic woman to my who is a white man, who stands whiteness, who shows up still today. Look at it as, okay, this is the person that guides our project, or kind of shepherds us. Your advisor stays with you. Like, especially if you are interested in faculty life, they stay with you in a way you cannot imagine. They set you up in ways. And so I really thank God for Dr. Darrell Hatch at the University of Nebraska Lincoln, because he took me on when he didn't have to. And honestly, he tells everyone, all I needed was someone to get the hell out of my way. And that's what he did for me, right? So what does it look like to not be fearful? And it might not be the norm, because it wasn't the norm at Nebraska, changing advisors. But guess what? It was what was best for me. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. If that person isn't the right fit, if they're not understanding your project, if you know your work in and out, but they refuse to let you do your work, then maybe you need to give them some freedom papers.
Right on.
So again, thank you so much, Dr. Briscoe, for the presentation. I'm just gonna briefly pass it over to my colleague Hannah, who's gonna tell us a little bit more about our upcoming event.
Woohoo! That was so good. Woo, thank you.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Hannah Reyes, and I'm in QualLab GRA, helping organize the Advanced Methods Institute. And I won't keep you long since we are running on 1 p.m. right now. But I do want to just announce that we are officially open for the AMI registration. And so it's a 3-day conference that we're having, all virtual, where we're having some amazing scholars in addition to the ones that Dr. Pasquale mentioned. We also have some of the presenters here in the room that are stellar. We have Dr. Palmer, we have Dr. Ford, we have Dr. Beaton, and we have Dr. Evans Winters all here in attendance with us. Yes, please register for AMI. It is going to be a great time, but if you have any questions, please reach out to me. If you scan that QR code, it has everything you need for registration to find out more about the program. And if you need me, my email is also on the website in multiple places. But thank you all, and I hope that we'll see you this summer.
Thank you, Hannah. So this marks the end of the lunch track today. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you all at our next event.
Thank you so much, Dr. Briscoe. Woo!